Welcome to ENG, sorry, for Welcome to English 4E, class 29. We are working today on assignment K36. This is about writing a proposal, and I am Jillian Percy. Here is the contact information. Facebook and YouTube are the same, capital G, capital P, ERCY, space, capital W, AHSA. For email, you can reach me at jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. You need to send assignments to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. Always include your name, the course number, and the assignment number and name. All right, today we are going to be examining the parts of a business proposal, learning how to write each section of a proposal, and looking at graphics that might help illustrate the ideas behind your proposal. So this is key question number 36, and it's called a report with promise, and it's worth 30 marks. Here is the scenario. You and a group of friends, male and female, have a keen interest in having a new daycare center built in your community. You've all realized a need for such a product from listening to what others have been saying and from your own personal experience. It has been a concern in the community for a while that working parents of small children are having difficulty at times finding reliable care, which has made the job situation a struggle. As well, WASA students, many of whom work, have expressed difficulties in keeping up with their studies during the day due to always having kids around them. The answer, a new daycare center catering to the needs of families with small children. There would be several jobs in construction created for local people, and afterwards, several people, ladies mostly, needed to work there. It is a project worth promoting and having become a reality. An estimated $200,000 is needed for the construction phase of the project, and a proposal has to be developed to seek this necessary funding. Your task will be to produce a proposal on behalf of your friends and the community, which will then be presented to your chief and council and then forwarded to the appropriate government agency. If approved, your proposal will ensure that the new daycare center will be built. I just wanted to point out, it mentioned that having ladies work there, men can also work in daycare centers, right? They are also allowed. So I just want to point that out. I've known some excellent ECE workers and kindergarten workers who are men. So questions, in what location could such a facility be built? In other words, in your community, where would that go? How many families would such a facility support? Based on information provided on the proposal writing, including the sample proposal in this unit, which we're going to look at again, you are to put one together to address the concern identified here. You will most likely need to carefully review the informational sections and also read through the sample proposal again to ensure that you'll be on track with the various steps involved. For the actual proposal, ensure that you have appropriate headings identified along with content to include. Use of the writing process, including revising and editing, will be particularly important in this regard. Although it will be most likely, I think absolutely likely, to do some pre-writing to get some thoughts and ideas on paper, followed by writing a first draft or a rough copy of your proposal, you are required to submit only the final copy. It should be approximately the same length as the sample proposal examined earlier, which, like I said, we're going to review in a minute. Furthermore, the final copy of your proposal must be produced on a computer, and you are to use at least 2 visual aids in your proposal to add to its overall quality. Now, if for some reason you have a different idea for a proposal that you want to write about, that would be more helpful to your community, for example, it is by all means okay. Just let me know what it is so I can kind of take a look at it and see if it's the kind of thing that will be a good substitute, right? It might be too big an idea that won't really work, or it might be too small an idea and might not really work there. So kind of talk to me ahead of time if you have a different idea that you want to work on. Okay, so this is the sample proposal that we looked at earlier, and the sections, the headings, like request for funding, introduction, those are the same kind of sections and headings that you're going to need in your proposal. That's why we're kind of going through. The first time we were looking at it in order to understand it and answer questions about it. Now we're looking at it as a role model for how to write one of these. So first of all, the request for funding, who is it to? In this case, it's not going to be to the Friends of the Environment Foundation. We've already talked about it. You're going to be writing to your chief, right? And then who's it from? Now, right now, it's whoever you are, but you may want to invent like a group that is involved in this, like the daycare proposal group or something like that. And then you've got an introduction. The introduction is kind of like a quick overview. So the people that are reading it have a overall idea of what they're getting into. And then you're going to kind of dive deep into all the information in the next sections. But this kind of gives people sort of a heads up. Functionally, it's the same kind of idea as like either an opening sentence or an opening paragraph. You're just kind of giving your reader the topic so they understand what's happening. So here they've got, we are requesting funding in order to improve a very popular interactive display designed to educate the public about green environmental practices in the home. The estimated total cost of the project is $7,500. After receiving a donation of some display panels, we still need $4,500. Construction of the display would begin in April or earlier if a part-time coordinator is hired and be completed by the end of May. Now, obviously, you would use a different sort of timeline, okay? Hang on a second, let me just grab the next part. Okay, sample proposal, background. So here they're providing the background for their proposal, which was about the City of Horrors. And you're going to provide background for why a daycare is needed in your community, okay? In 2021, OPIRG Kenora developed an extremely popular educational display called the City House of Horrors. The display is a mock-up of a house with real fixtures. Individuals walk into the display as they would rooms of their own home and are presented with information in a variety of forms that provides practical and simple alternatives to common household activities that are bad for the environment. So then they go on to explain all the different things. Now, here they're trying to update an existing uh, sort of a display, basically. Whereas in this, we're trying to create a daycare essentially from nothing, although you could be like maybe trying to revise a certain building and repurposing it for a daycare. So here you would kind of talk about like, how did the idea come about? Why did you suddenly decide that a daycare is needed, right? In the scenario, it came about from different parents kind of discussing, hey, we could use this. And then now in this part, they start to talk about a door-to-door survey they conducted that helped them to know what kind of environmental information people were lacking, and they addressed that need through their proposal. So by the same token, maybe you do a survey about what kind of daycare needs are needed in your community and use that. Now, you don't have to create the actual survey and do it. It could be a totally pretend survey of like, we discussed this with or sent surveys to 500 households. Of that, 300 got back to us. Of the 300, 200 indicated a need for daycare for the children, but 100 of those said they already have arrangements that are working for them. However, 100 households said that they are needing daycare and don't have it, and it impacts their ability to work. So that kind of information is what people would need to see that there really is a reason for this. Because obviously nobody wants to go into this giant project, spend all this money, and then discover nobody actually needs it or uses it. So that's kind of part of your background, all right? Then they kind of do a quick sort of tight version of what the proposal is, but in a very short fashion. So here they are. We are seeking funds to improve our version of the City House of Horrors. The concept is fully developed, but we want to make it more professional looking and lightweight so that it can be easily moved and set up. We would like to make a new model that would stand up to a lot of use. You would do the same format, but just kind of discussing about the daycare. Rationale: the number of environmental disasters and problems can be overwhelming for most people. It is often difficult to see how individuals can have an impact on problems as large as global warming. The importance of the City House of Horrors display is that it shows how individuals can make significant contributions to their local and global environment. So in other words, they're telling you, here's the problem that we've seen, and that's why we're trying to create this proposal, because it will solve this problem. So here is where you'd want to describe what is the problem in your community that you are trying to solve. Obviously, the issue is there's not enough people who are providing daycare, or there's more people who need to work or want to work than are able to because there's not enough babysitters to go around. Okay, and obviously also if you're paying for babysitting services, that can get expensive, right? So one thing you'd want to think about for this daycare is, are parents using this as a free facility that the abandoned community is kind of preparing for them? Is there some sort of small user fee that might not pay for the entire cost, but might kind of offset the cost for the band? You need to kind of think about those sort of things a little bit. All right, uses of the display. So in this section, they talk about where the display is going to get shown, how many people are going to see it, and then kind of going forward what they would do with it, right? For you, uses of the display, what is going to be the use of the daycare? Who is going to use it? How many people are going to use it? What hours will it be open? That kind of idea, right? And then we look at estimated costs. Here they kind of covered the big things and what kind of costs. Ours might be slightly like more of a complicated budget because we're building a bigger project, right? They also mentioned they call this in-kind contribution. That means they didn't get donated the actual $3,000. They got donated materials that would have cost them $3,000 to purchase. And so functionally, that is being treated like money for the purposes of the budget. So they only need now 4,500 instead of the original 7,500. One of the things we're going to talk about is, because this is a big project and they've only allocated 200,000, which I'm not sure it's really a very realistic amount for building an entire daycare, especially these days since COVID, building materials are so expensive. But maybe there's some different contributions or donated materials or donated labor or whatever that could be helping to offset the overall cost. And then they have a budget note. Now, I want to point out, if you go back to looking at the estimated cost, see how there's a number next to each item, 1, 2, 3, 4. So anything that could be confusing, they've put a number next to it. And then in the budget notes, they put the same number there and then explain that particular amount and how they reached that. So here for project coordinator 2,500, they didn't just guess that and like randomly decide, well, that's what's going to cost. No, they stopped and thought about, okay, well, they're going to work full time for 8 weeks or half-time position. They're going to make $16 an hour. And here will be their job responsibilities. And then number 2 is their benefits. That's going to be the unemployment insurance, Canada Pensions Plan, employer's health tax, that kind of thing. So each time they mention an item, they go through in the notes and explain that item and explain how they reached that number so that they understand it's not just random numbers. The numbers have been reached using math and their best knowledge of what these kind of things cost. Staffing. Here they kind of go into who's going to make this work, essentially. We are a volunteer organization. We have 2 permanent staff and a variable number of grant staff. We have a volunteer board of students, community members, and numerous volunteers working on a wide variety of issues. This kind of project will draw on the ideas and advice of many of these people, and the project coordinator will be responsible for coordinating volunteer contributions to the project. At least one of the permanent staff will be involved in supervising the project. Depending on the various granting agencies, we may also have grant staff to assist with various aspects of the display. Certainly, we will have numerous people to draw on to staff the display at the block party and during Environmental Week. So I like how they did this because they're talking about the different places they're getting the staff, right? Some people are volunteers. Sometimes there's permanent staff. They also have volunteer students who might be working, and some of the places that are giving the money might also have people that would be contributing to the staff. That's something to think about because for our purposes, we might be getting staff from a variety of different sources as well. And then the last part of the sample proposal was a schedule. Here it was kind of like, we're going to begin it there, we're going to end it there in time for this particular deadline. And then credentials. Credentials are kind of like trying to think how to put it, like the training or education that you have that shows that your information and your ideas are valid, right? So if I was trying to create a proposal to start, I don't know, a factory, they would want to know, well, what's your business background or what's your industry background or what makes your knowledge and your ideas on this valuable or valid, right? So if I didn't have it, but I thought it was a good idea, I might have consulted somebody who was valid or had those kind of credentials, right? It doesn't have to be you yourself. It can be fine that you consulted with somebody else. Okay, so reviewing that whole proposal, these are the sections that you're going to need to have in your proposal as well, right? The same sections they had, you're going to have. There's going to be a to and from section, an introduction section, background, proposal, that's kind of a brief thing, rationale, usage, estimated cost, budget notes, staffing information, schedule, and credentials. Okay, so who is this going to? It's going first to your chief and council, and then after they've approved that, it would be going to the appropriate government agency. I'm going to assume probably Indigenous Services Canada, but maybe it's somebody else. Who is this from? Well, technically it's from you, but you're doing it on behalf of the entire friends and community. So maybe you give the people involved sort of overall name, right? So again, it's going to look a little more valid if it's coming from multiple people rather than just from one person, especially for a project, again, that's going to cost this kind of money. Okay, introduction. I'm just going to kind of go over what each section should have. It should be very brief, one paragraph only. It should state your proposal, the amount or the type of assistance being requested, your deadline or the targeted end date for the project or for the money. It's just meant to be a quick overview that lets the reader know what they're reading, why they're reading it, what amount of help is being asked for, and when you need it. Background section. This is the part where you're going to be explaining things more in depth. How did the project idea get started? How is it developed? Who is your group? Who will be benefiting from the completed product? How do you know people will actually use it? Do you have a possible location picked out? Do you know how big a building you're going to need? Do you have an estimate of how many families might use it or how many children might attend? Going forward as well, remember, not just this year, right? How is the projected usage going to be as well? Are you aware of the laws around preschool and have an appropriate level of staff that you're going to need? Is the rest of the community interested in the product? What about chief and council? Well, hopefully chief and council are interested, but that's who you're sending it to. Any background information that you can give that will help explain the project more in depth and show that you've done your research so that you know this project is actually feasible and will be helpful. Okay, so proposal is a little tiny section, right? It's just a brief statement of the overall proposal and why you need their help with this project. It only needs to be a few sentences long. The rationale section's a bit longer. This is kind of like a pitch for the project. A pitch is like a sales presentation, right? It may be done for a small project that doesn't have a full business case or as a preliminary artifact to pitch a project to stakeholders. In this case, the stakeholders are chief and council. A project rationale typically states the problem, the solution, and the benefits of the solution you're trying to do as compared to any alternatives, right? So you got to think about, how does having a daycare benefit children and parents? How does having the daycare benefit business in the community, right? If the community is going to be spending money on it, how does it help everybody, not just those specific parents, in other words? Why is building a daycare better than some of the other possible alternatives? Also, what would be the alternatives? Every family trying to find a babysitter on their own? What would be problematic about this situation? Well, a lot of times too, one thing to think about is babysitting doesn't usually make a whole lot of money. So the person that is babysitting might not actually be making very much money, or if people are paying them a good wage, sometimes that means they're not very much like making very much from what they're doing. The daycare is costing them almost as much as working, right? How would having a daycare center where multiple children could be watched at the same time improve the situation for working moms? Usage. This is where you discuss how many people might use it and for how long. How do you know how many people would use it? How many people on reserve or in your area currently have children 5 and under that might need childcare? what ages will your daycare take? In other words, like, will it take infants? Will it start at 1.5, 2? Where is it going to cap? Is it only taking kids up to age 3 or 4 or 5? Is there junior kindergarten in your area? In which case you may want to cut it off at 3 because at 4 people can go to junior kindergarten. But if you don't, maybe you want to cut it off at 4, right? Have you done a survey of working parents to see who is currently needing childcare? How many of those people would be willing to switch to a daycare center instead? So for some people, a babysitter might be more convenient, right? Like I knew a friend who she had the grandparents helping out, and certain grandparents were helping on some days, and other grandparents were helping another day. And that was super convenient for them. So not everybody who needs a babysitter is necessarily going to want to switch to a daycare. So you need to be like, keep that in mind too, right? You don't want to make any assumptions that just because they're paying for a babysitter right now, that they'll be happy to switch to a daycare. They might not. Many of these details are going to have to be made up, right? You don't have to do the actual survey, but they should be reasonable guesstimates, right? No one is going to build an expensive daycare if only a few children, like less than 5, are really going to use it. It's just not worth it for the cost. Okay. Estimated cost. Okay, so I'm aware this is kind of a tricky area, right? We're not necessarily all math majors. So in the following slides, I've included some possible references that might help you put together an estimated budget. It's important to remember several things. First of all, this is made up. I'm looking at your writing. I'm not looking at your math and whether your estimates are 100% accurate, okay? You could always write that people have donated certain materials or certain labor costs, which we're going to talk about when we get there. Other sources might also be providing part of the cost. For example, the band might have money set aside to contribute to the staffing costs or to the construction of building this daycare. So one thing to think about is daycares have to have a minimum staff to child ratios, okay? They may choose to have more staff, but they may not have less staff that it is set out below, mainly because it's unsafe, right? The younger children are, the more care they need, right? So for infants, in other words, anyone younger than 18 months, you need 3 staff to 10 children because infants require so much work, right? You have to change them, you have to hold them, you have to feed them. Somebody couldn't watch 20 infants by themselves, not realistically, right? Maximum number of children in the group, you couldn't have more than 10 infants. Some people get around that by doing like an infant room if it's a big daycare and that infant room has a certain amount of staffing and it might be like physically blockaded from the other parts of the daycare. Toddlers. Toddlers is 18 to 30 months. They're 1 staff member to every 5 children. Maximum children, it would be 15. And again, infants could be in one section of the daycare, toddlers could have another section. Preschool is 30 months to 6 years. And here's where you'd have to decide how far are you guys going, right? Ratio of staff to children, 1 adult for every 8 children. Maximum number of children is 24. And then you're getting to kindergarten. I don't know that you necessarily would want to offer kindergarten because it's already a free item and it might not necessarily get a lot of, there's not really a huge need for it because it's already being paid for, but that's just kind of part of the thing. So if you know you're going to include infants, then you have to make sure you've got enough staff. If you know you're only going to start at toddlers, then you might not need quite as much staff. That's something to think about when you're thinking about how much staff you're going to need, not to build the daycare, but to run the daycare once it's open. Okay, so going to building a daycare, I just kind of grabbed this information from the internet. If you are actually involved in construction in your community, you may actually know a lot more accurate or more current estimates. This is just what I had to kind of get people started, okay? The cost varies depending on size and location, but typically it ranges from $40 to $60 per square foot for construction materials alone, not counting the labor. So an average size daycare center is going to have about 5,500 square feet, which could cost anywhere between 23,000 to 38,000 for construction alone, not including the labor again. Now, we're only asking for 200,000. So we're probably building a smaller daycare, and maybe we're going to use the lower end estimate. We can also think about maybe someone's donated some of the materials to the product, right? Maybe we're just revising a current building rather than having to build from scratch. Or maybe your reserve is a sawmill, and so the lumber can be gotten for cheaper. Remember, it's a made-up proposal, so you can make up what you want. Maybe the band's going to be using their own construction crew, and so they're going to be paying for the wages, so you have to worry about that part of it. It's totally fine to be inventive as to how this is all going to get built. So for example, on that kind of thing, maybe your daycare is going to be 4,000 square feet, and we're assuming a $40 cost per square foot. So 4,000 times $40 is 160,000. So that's kind of an example of some of the background notes that you might do to explain the cost that you're putting on the budget. Okay. You also have to put furniture in the daycare. You can't just build it and go. Again, this is another item I found on the internet about the possible costs of different types of furniture. However, remember, not every daycare is going to need all of these items. For example, maybe you're building near another school and you guys are going to share the outdoor play equipment. Or maybe you're not going to have big fancy slides, you're just going to have some balls and a sandbox and a place to run around. Maybe getting the outdoor playground equipment might be a project for another year. Maybe the school is going to donate some certain furniture that they've got extra for kindergarten to help out with the daycare, or maybe they're donating books to read for the library. Kitchen area might be very small, maybe just a microwave and a sink with maybe a plug-in griddle. So some examples are things like safe and child-friendly furniture, child-sized tables and chairs, play mats, sleeping cots, educational materials and toys, outdoor play equipment, safety measures. I'm not sure what they mean there. I don't know. You probably are going to need a fence around the play area for one thing. Diaper changing stations and hygiene supplies. That's going to be a significant cost. Kitchen area for meal prep, first aid kit and emergency supplies, security system, computer and educational software. Again, you wouldn't necessarily have to have that. Art supplies and a library corner. So again, this is kind of some random ideas. You can make up your own idea of how much things are going to cost. And again, you don't have to include everything. You obviously are going to need tables and chairs. You're going to need some sort of sleeping area. You're going to need some sort of play equipment. It doesn't have to be the outdoor play equipment, but the kids have to play with something, right? Okay, so those are some examples of some of the costs involved in building the daycare. Okay, when we're talking about the staffing, educator who is in charge of the entire thing, like the person who's managing the daycare, might make the high end salary. Someone who's just an assistant might make the low end. And also you would look at training and experience. So if somebody's been working for 20 years as the Aboriginal Head Start coordinator, then they're probably going to make more than somebody who's just graduated high school and hasn't worked at all. So in Ontario, typically, ECE gets $16.55 an hour. That's a low end. Median or the middle is $20.51, and then high would be 28. This is probably from a few years ago. I think it would be slightly higher now, but for some reason, educational lower ECE workers just don't make nearly as much as, say, teachers, which I don't think is fair, but it's kind of one of the facts. Budget notes. Those are simply a line-by-line explanation of each cost listed in your budget. If they put it actually in the budget, it would just be too hard to read. It'd be too much information at once. This is where you might explain about donated materials or that the band will be covering the costs of the construction crew. You're not going to need community advertising costs for a small community project like this. It can be pretty general, right? The committee costs, building supply costs, labor costs, specialized labor costs like plumbers, electricians, furnishing costs, daycare staffing costs. Now, staffing is going to have several parts for a bigger project like this. First, part one, someone has to oversee the project. This is going to require someone who has decision-making power and possibly a committee to share the work for staying in touch with everybody, obtaining materials, hiring, etc. Are these people volunteers? In other words, are you and your parent friends going to be the ones doing this? If not, how much are these people getting paid? Is that money part of what you're asking for, or is it coming from somewhere else? Where or what are those estimated costs? Now, for example, maybe there is a housing and construction manager in your community and they're going to take over overseeing the project. This is just what you would put then in the budget notes. Hey, this is how this is going to be overseen, and this is who's going to be doing that part. Part two, actually building the daycare. This is going to require an architect, a construction company, maybe some skilled trades workers, or probably like plumbers, electricians, people who those things have to be certified because there's problems with them otherwise, right? Do you have some estimated costs for this? Have you talked to actual construction companies and have some realistic estimates? Now, remember, this is made up. You don't actually have to call construction companies, but you need to have some realistic estimates. But you can just look on the internet for that kind of stuff, right? Is all the staff going to be hired locally, like the construction staff? There may be a local construction team, and the housing manager will just put them on, and the band will just cover the wages for that. So that may not be something you have to worry about. You may only have to worry about the materials. The band may still want to know what the estimated costs are, which is going to be part of like the timeline. So people are going to work for 3 months at 40 hours a week at this amount, la, 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 all that kind of stuff. And again, it's okay to make it up, right? Part three, staffing the daycare. The amount of money of 200,000, that is not going to be enough to staff the daycare realistically, because for staffing, you need money coming in every year. The 200,000, that probably would just cover, like might not even cover salaries for the teachers and the assistants. Who is paying for that? Is it the band? Is it going to be something that Indigenous services will cover costs? What are those estimated costs? Make sure the estimated staffing costs are included in your budget and who will be paying for each type of those costs. So for example, if Aboriginal Head Start isn't running in your community, that's one possible place that might help provide staffing, right? Okay, the schedule. What needs to get scheduled? Do you need to get scheduled for bids from construction companies, or is there a company that you're already using? What's the timeline from getting the money to start the building to completion of the building? That's part is probably going to take the longest. Think about how big a building does it need to be? Is there any chance that an existing building is just going to be renovated? Also, what is your construction time frame, right? Winter is a big issue here. We often can't do construction reasonably in the wintertime without causing a lot of problems. You got to kind of think about that when you're doing your schedule. Again, it's still a made up schedule, and I'm not by any means a construction specialist, so I won't know if it's realistic. Obviously, it's not going to get built in a week, though, right? Also, a schedule for hiring childcare staff and a custodian, right? You've got to like put out the ads, do some interviews, hire people. If you're possibly working with untrained staff, which might happen, right? If you're in your community that's never been a daycare, you might not have anybody who has background training. How are you going to do the training? How long is that going to take? Is that going to be happening while the building's being built? You got to think about that part too. How long does it take to build a typical daycare center? Well, from what I saw, it takes approximately 3 months to build a new daycare center, depending on the size and depending on the location. The time frame also depends on whether or not there are any delays due to permits or weather issues. So permits are probably not a problem, but we do have to be conscious of the weather. The size and location, keep in mind the housing manager may already have the construction crew committed to doing a bunch of other projects. So it might be something that's happening this year. Maybe it's happening like next summer when they can schedule things a little bit better. Okay, credentials. This is kind of a funny one. Credentials are talking about what qualifications you have to be running or even suggesting a project of this sort. So you might want to list any previous projects that you've been involved with or other people on your parent team or helped to organize. If you have any official job training or experience in making this type of proposal or running this type of things, this is where you would mention it. It does not need to be an extremely long section. Assuming that you've got multiple people involved in the group, it would be helpful to have at least one early child care educator involved or at least consulted on with the building, the staffing, the program. If you don't already have that in your community, maybe you like are including the kindergarten teacher in this, or maybe the the education executive director is going to be consulted on this, or maybe you're talking to the Aboriginal Head Start educator from a different community to get some ideas on costs and staffing and that kind of thing, right? And again, this is invented, right? You can decide what details you want to invent, but there does need to be like some people who have credentials for this to be a plausible project, right? It would also be necessary to discuss the project with someone at the band who would have the authority to approve it or help oversee it to make sure the building's being built properly. That's where we're talking about the housing manager, right? Or the construction manager, whoever does that in your community, right? This person might also be able to help you with the scheduling for how long it would take to build the center. Again, this is imaginary. You are making up the details. You can use whatever is realistic for your community, right? If so-and-so is in charge of housing right now, you're welcome to kind of like say so-and-so is who I would talk to. But if there isn't anybody, if you're not sure, again, it's fine to just make somebody up. That's okay. All right. Remember that for this project, they want you to include 2 graphics. Now, we don't want these to be just like pretty decorations. We want them to be something will actually add to the content of your proposal, right? So you might include things like maybe there's a rough diagram of a floor plan for a daycare, or maybe a photograph of a similar daycare center, similar size, for example, done by a construction company. It'd be even better if it was the construction company you already deal with. A bar graph of survey results on how many people might use it, a timeline of an estimated schedule. And you might have several timelines, like maybe here's the timeline for building the project. Here's the timeline for staffing the project. A map of a planned location in the community. This one seems pretty important, right? Some communities are pretty built up and don't have a lot of space, or their space is close to the water, might be hard to get to. Think about where in your community would it be built. You might include logos from companies that have agreed to donate materials or anything else that seems appropriate that relates to the content, not just make it look pretty. Where are you going to find these graphics? Well, a lot of these type of things can be found on the internet or taken from a magazine or even hand drawn or created by your computer. If you take a graphic from somewhere else, just include the URL that you got it from. In other words, if you took it off the net, tell me kind of where you got it. And it can just be in small print. I'll kind of show you that in a second. So remember, programs like PowerPoint or Google Slides can help you with graphics. I'm going to show you a PowerPoint for a second. If you go up to, hang on, where is it? Insert. You have 2 things. You have Smart Art here. Smart Art usually connects to, okay, good. So I'm going to just kind of grab one just for example. This is one I could fill in. I hit OK, and it would come up, and then I would just go in and edit the text. Daycare center, right? This kind of stuff, I can skip here. I can make it look different, fancy, however I want, get very graphic. I can also change the color to something else, kind of rainbow, or I don't like the blue, I could go with red, whatever I feel like. Here, I've clicked on one, so it just changed that one and not all of them for some reason. Okay, good. I'm going to erase that right now just so I've got room so you can see the other bits there. Hang on a second. Oh, okay. So some example, here was one that you could use for timelines. Here's one that's meant to be like a relationship graph. That might be useful for showing different sources of money, or maybe you could use it to show like the percentage of parents that might want to use this. Remember that you can make things, can I make it bigger or no? Huh. I can make it bigger or smaller, but I don't think I can change the sort of the width of it to do a proper bar chart. For that, I would need, hang on, look, charts. Okay. These are often linked to actual actual information. Let me see if I can do this. Hang on. Okay. So it's linked to up here. If I change this, say right now it's 8.2. If I put it at 20, all of a sudden it changes things. Let me think here. One. See how it changes things as I go along? So I could use this to create a really nice little graph, say, of the parent results. That is from, hang on, I don't have to cross it off. Sorry, I apologize. Cut. Okay. Um, that is this part, the charts, rather than the smart art. The 3D models is where you can add realistic looking things. Let me just grab a fresh page so I can just kind of show you. I'm doing this because I don't know how much familiarity you have with these kind of programs. So it's actually really easy to do, but I wasn't sure how much you're used to it. So from okay, hang on a sec. Let me see here, furniture. Okay, and it pulls things up. So let's say I wanted to do like a little mock-up of the thing of my daycare center. Hang on. Okay. Oh, can oh, look, I can change the perspective of it. That's kind of cool. So I could do like a little mock-up of this kind of thing if I wanted to. You don't have to by any means. It's just an example of one more type of graphic you can show. Here is a chart. I got this from here. I didn't bother to relabel it, but I can. Here is a sample map. You could probably get a photographic or a satellite type map of your community. Here is a possible floor plan, which again could be hand drawn, and there's all sorts of software programs. The other thing is not everybody has PowerPoint, but if you are a student with WASA, then you have access to Google Slides. So I'm going to kind of quickly go to Google Slides. Oh, can I? Yeah, I think I can. In case you haven't used it, because I want to show you really quickly how it can be used that way. So see how I've got my little kind of like a waffle grid here. If I go down, it's yellow. See this yellow slides? This is exactly like PowerPoint. Okay, sorry, I gotta kind of log in again. Okay. Sorry, hang on a second. Okay, so if I pull up a presentation, okay, I'm going to give myself a blank slide for a second here. Slide, new slide. Okay. If I go up to insert, I can insert images like a picture of a daycare. I could insert a little video. I wouldn't want to do a video though for this proposal because it's not going to be online. I could make up a little chart for my budget if I wanted to. This one is just like the PowerPoint is connected to Excel. This one is connected to whatever the Google version of Excel is. I can't remember what it's called, Sheets. Okay. So again, I could play around with this and change the different types, which would affect things. Linked chart, open source. Okay. So same thing, I could just create the pie chart information and then it would change things. Okay. Kind of easy. What else can I insert here? Oh, the diagrams, just like I showed you before on a PowerPoint, we have those similar kind of diagrams here. So for example, here would be a timeline one. See how it just kind of looks really nice and professional, but it really doesn't involve anything. I would just kind of erase what they've got for their text and write it over, right? So digging the foundation. And I'd put, let me think here, 224, August. Okay, so I'm just kind of showing you it's really, really easy to use this to be able to add graphs. That's another good reason why doing the proposal on the computer is the best thing. If you are somewhere where you can't easily use a computer, just let me know. I can accept handwritten if I need to, but for a business proposal like this, um, you would be typing it, you wouldn't hand it in non-typed. So you do want to kind of practice that and all that kind of formatting thing, which I know if you're not used to it can be kind of a little bit of a hassle, but it is one of those things you want to be able to do, right? Okay, once you've done your rough draft, You need to kind of go over and check things, right? Don't just hand in your rough draft without checking it. First of all, you want to make sure that every section that is needed is there. And I've got the checklist earlier in the video of all the sections. Those have to be there. Then go back and make sure your writing is clear and understandable. This is a huge thing in business writing. There should be no run-on sentences, right? Business writing is brief, it's to the point. They do not go in for long sentences. Be sure to use paragraphs. These don't need to be in the academic format as this is business writing. So academic format, we have an opening sentence, 5 details, and then a closing sentence. For business, you just more get right to the point and tell the information. However, you would try and create paragraphs based around the same topic. If you switch to a new topic, start a new paragraph. And be sure your graphics add information and are not simply decorative. I want to go over to the background section of the original, just kind of, I don't know if they did it in theirs, but just to show you. Okay, background. To me, here's kind of a natural spot where there'd be a paragraph because this part is about the survey and how they discovered exactly what people were looking for. This is kind of, oh, hang on. This part needs to be down there too. Okay. So it's okay to do like I'm doing and kind of play around and see what goes together. The reason for this is because it's just so much easier to read a short paragraph of information than it is to read a big long page of information. So chunk your sentences of like maybe 3 to 6 sentences into little tiny sections that are just easier to read. Leave a line or 2 lines between the paragraphs so it's easy to read. For business writing, they don't normally do the indent thing that we sometimes do in academic writing, okay? I'm not really sure. I know this is it's a very big, challenging, culminating activity. Keep in mind that I'm aware that it's challenging and that I'm not looking at the math. I'm looking at how you explain your ideas. So that is your focus as well. There is some math. There's no way around that. Business writing is going to involve some math, but I'm not like out there with my calculator looking to add everything up and making sure it works. And it doesn't need to be so detailed that you could actually hand it to your chief and counsel right now, right? This is us learning how to do this kind of writing. So I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. This is very doable. If you start this and start to get a little bit overwhelmed and nervous, by all means, reach out, give me a phone call, send me an email. You can even kind of send me what you've got so far to like, hey, what do you think of this? And I'd be happy to discuss this with you because I do understand this is kind of a big ask, okay? Um, Later on, we will look at, I think we're at the culminating activity. So we are almost finished unit 3, and then we're going to do unit 4, which is really short. And we've just basically got this last week, and then we will be finished this class, okay? Thank you so much for showing up today, and I hope you're having fun doing these assignments. Thank you.